Hi, everyone. If you could all start moving into the house and take a seat, we're about to start our next session. Oh, hello, Lavelda's here. Everyone be like Lavelda. Moving on in. Come on. We're going to start in just 2 minutes' time. I know it's hard to pull yourselves away from the beautiful sun, but we have an amazing couple of sessions coming up. Ah, Olivier, bravo. Bon exemple. All right, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to this second half of day 2 of the Ocean Innovators Platform. Welcome as well to everyone who is joining us online at home. Remember, you can all ask your questions at the end of each panel, either in person or via the platform if you're online. Just a reminder to all of you, wherever you are, you can post, tweet, whatever you want about all of the incredible things that we're talking about today with the hashtag MOW23. You're also more than welcome to tag the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation to try and help promote this event. And speaking of the Prince, His Serene Highness, Prince Albert II, will be here with us this afternoon at the end of the day around 5:30 p.m. In the meantime, it's time for our next panel. This one is going to focus on shipping. Now, shipping is an industry that's responsible for the transportation of around 90% of world trade. Its emissions, however, account for almost 3% of all emissions in the world and are steadily rising. To focus now on the challenges of how best to go green on the seas, we're going to welcome our panelists, Johannes Bogdalowski from CH4, Daniel Southcott from Veer, Miguel Navalon from Navlandis, and Sebastian Heitman from Extantia Capital. This session will be moderated by Impact and ESG investing professional, Desiree Fixler. Let's welcome them. So you guys sit anywhere.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this session. We had a call, and we had such an interesting, lively debate. As this session has been introduced, we're going to talk about the challenges of greening the shipping industry. What can we do to decarbonize it? And we're going to hear from our panelists about technological solutions and support for technological solutions on achieving net zero in shipping. I'm going to briefly introduce everybody. In the first part, we'll just hear about their amazing companies. And the second part, we're going to focus on the challenges and hurdles to scale and make an impact. So Danielle Southcott is the founder of Veer, and it's a clean shipping and energy company that intends to launch the first clean container ship across the ocean. We also have Johannes, who has created CH4 with the vision of creating economic opportunity while maximizing impact, continuing to focus on the ocean. We have Miguel Navalon. He's the CEO of Navlandis, a startup with a strong R&D component focused in the logistics sector that dreams of a more efficient and sustainable transport and maritime sector. And then finally, we have Sebastian Heitman. Sebastian is the co-founder of Extantia Capital, a 300 million euro climate-first investment platform backing founders of breakthrough technologies that accelerate the transition to a decarbonized world. Okay, so I'm going to kick it off with you, Miguel. Can you please tell us more about Navlandis and its mission to green shipping?
Yes, okay. Navlandis has the ambition of making transport more sustainable, and we are doing that optimizing the transport of empty containers. Due to global trade imbalances, import-dominated ports accumulate large amounts of empty containers, while export-dominated ports need them as transport equipment. So shipping lines and logistic operators need to transport empty containers from surplus areas to shortage areas. And in fact, 25% of the total global traffic is empty containers. They
That's
are transporting
incredible.
only air, with a global traffic of 160 million containers in a year. 40 million containers are only transporting air. So the impact is more than $20 billion per year and 200 million tons of CO2 emissions. Our intention is to solve this issue with a new patented and innovative design of container. It's a foldable container, C-Box, that has the same features as the standard container, but can be folded when it's empty. And we packed 5 folded containers in the same space as one, so we can divide by 5 the most important factors for this impact. We can reduce 80% of the need of space in transport and storage. We can cut by 70% the CO2 emissions, and we can save more than 50% of the cost of moving empty containers. And furthermore, to break the market barriers in terms of cost and risk, we have launched a disruptive business model. It's a leasing under pay-as-you-save revenue model without initial cost for the customer and getting a success fee related with the savings that we really achieve. And that's, I think, a strategic movement to have the first customers, the first real paying customers.
It's incredible. You know, you hear about this innovation, and it's incredible that we haven't had this before, and that we've wasted so much and polluted so much in transporting empty boxes. It's like wheels on suitcases. You're like, how did we live before that? So amazing. Thank you. Danielle, I'm going to move to you. You have a mission to deploy the first clean container ship. How does the vessel's zero carbon energy work?
Great. Well, thank you very much. And hello, my name is Danielle, and thank you all for having me here. Just a quick little correction, because there's so many different things that we have to be cautious of. It will be the first clean container ship to cross an ocean. So we do have clean container ships in the canals in Netherlands and in the fjords in Norway, but we don't have any deep sea vessels. So before I answer your question, I'd like to acknowledge that Veer is registered in the Bahamas, which is the ancestral territory of the Taino people, and that our headquarters are in Nova Scotia currently, which is the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. So Veer is able to have zero emission fuel. Well, we don't really say zero emission because if you really get down to it, there are emissions associated with everything. When the crew eat carrots, there are emissions. Scope 3 is what we're trying to look forward to. But we do have clean transportation, and we are defining that as zero carbon fuels or non-fossil fuels, that sort of thing. We do that by combining wind, which is our primary engine, with our auxiliary engine, which is green hydrogen fuel cells. This allows us to overcome the issue of energy density that we currently have with hydrogen, because our primary engine is renewable and all around us, the wind.
Thank you so much. So moving on, Johannes. So we've just heard that we're using wind and hydrogen, green hydrogen. Your company has developed a biofuel. Can you tell us, please, about what the biofuel is and whether or not it's scalable and an optimal choice for green shipping?
Yeah, all right. So first, we haven't developed the biofuel. We just found the way to make it scalable. But yes, the idea is to have algae to produce biomass, which can then be converted into bio-LNG, which is a very readily adaptable fuel for the shipping industry, with I think some 30% of all new built vessels currently being powered with LNG. That is fossil LNG typically, but we can replace that with with carbon neutral LNG. And when it comes to scalability, so an area equivalent of that of Lake Victoria would be sufficient to replace about 2/3 of the global fleet's demand of fuel. That would be sufficient. And when you then consider that we're having some 13,000 kilometers of shore around Africa where we could deploy, the space is available. And it's exclusively desert shore, so we're not in competition with food production or civilization pressure, nor are we impacting valuable habitats either.
Thank you so much. So we've heard from founders of companies developing technology to green shipping. Now we're going to move to how we support these founders. We're moving to the venture capital space. Sebastian, you founded, of course, an early growth fund company to power and scale climate-first startups. What have you invested in that is greening the seas now?
Well, first of all, so thank you for having me. Very pleasure to be at this very inspiring event. So investing in green shipping, there's of course, this is an energy question at the end of the day, right? So we have invested left and right into energy. We'll always characterize our investment focus. Anything that has an H and a C atom in it tends to be in our focus. So we're very hardware prone. And stuff like the gentleman to the right to me is definitely in our focus. Yeah, so biofuels. As we are very adamant on, as we trying to, climate first is our mandate. We try to really look for large solutions that can help us decarbonize fast. We categorize this as sort of we say the time value of carbon is a concept that we sort of try to live by, meaning a ton of carbon that it can abate or remove today has a lot more value that happens in the year 2040 or 50. With that being said, what we're looking for is solutions that can fast deliver results. And actually, I think they're sitting some here in the panel, and also that can retrofit. So what have we done? We have invested into companies producing e-fuels, for example, for aviation and for shipping. We haven't done a biofuel investment yet, but we had a good chat earlier on already, so might get there. But also here on the right is also a very interesting solution on 40 million containers is an enormous amount. And then of course, if we talk in the future of infrastructure, what Danielle's doing, it's also something we potentially, probably it's not such a technology play. We're more really into technologies and patentable technologies, but still, is it something we will need? Yes.
Cool, thank you. So, we've heard such, incredible solutions to green shipping. You'd imagine that, companies, governments would be championing this great technology. But there are challenges. There are challenges to disrupting business as usual. So, Miguel, shouldn't the shipping companies be champions of your technology and all want your Z boxes?
Okay. First of all, we are facing, of course, challenges. The first challenge is to continue convincing customers of using our technology, our C-Box container. That's the reason of why we have developed our business model to de-risk for the customer the adoption of our technology. Any innovative product, any innovative technology need to break this market barrier. We have achieved that with our early adopters, with our first customers that are willing to pay for our technology, and they want to scale to the next step, that is 300 containers in 1 year. Mm-hmm. But there is another challenge, that it is the time. The timing in the shipping industry is quite low, is quite different from the timing in the startup and investment industry. So we need to find also patient investment to give us time to consolidate with what we have achieved. And finally, of course, the challenge of the money. Our business model is intensive in CapEx, so we need to manufacture our containers in advance to put them in revenues. So we need the financial model to source this capital for the manufacturing. But of course, at the beginning, we are not bankable because we are not yet profitable. So we need the support of the equity investment to support our operations. That's the reason we are looking for funding to manufacture these 300 containers. Related with the last question about if top players in the shipping industry could be champions, we have talked with them, of course. We have talked with Maersk, CMA, GGM, with Hapag-Lloyd. The answer that we have received is not by the moment. We are not. You cannot try with us. You cannot test with us. You need to start with the small players, demonstrating that your technology works, and after demonstrating that, you can come with a bigger fleet. And that's what we are doing. We are going step by step with the small players. We have 3 customers by now, and small shipping lines and 2 shippers. We have containers traveling from Denmark to Uruguay, from Turkey to West Africa, and hopefully very, very soon from Japan to Europe. And but we need to reach the next step. We need to reach the manufacturing of 300 containers, and before, the money to manufacture this.
Okay. Well, it's a task at hand, but it sounds like it's a timing question, funding question, and we're going to address, some of these challenges on the funding side in a moment with Sebastian. But again, staying on the issue of what are hurdles and challenges to scale, Johannes, with the production of your biofuel, what needs to change? Can ships just directly use it, or do they have to be retrofitted? Does the infrastructure around it also have to be changed?
Right. So as said earlier, a third of all vessels being built today are ready to take this fuel as is the infrastructure. And I think what's important is that it's a drop-in fuel to fossil fuel, so you can blend it seamlessly from 0 to 100%, which also allows you that from the first kilogram that you produce, you can use it. You don't need to reach a critical mass to have a marketable product, So yes, it's all ready, and for the road transport, we already have retrofit packs. Dual fuel kits for cars and trucks exist readily, and I guess it's only a matter of time until we get that for ships as well. And the ships that are built today, they'll be, like we're now building the infrastructure for 2050, right? The ships being built today are the ones in operation in 2050. So if we talk about net zero 2050, we need to decarbonize the combustion engine.
Fully agree.
Thank you. Okay, so Danielle, can you tell us, this is a little bit more of a personal question, what it's like to take on, a very big entrenched industry, such as the shipping industry, to radically change ship design, right, and disposing of the combustion engine. How does a visionary entrepreneur stay the course here? Because I'm sure there are a number of hurdles.
Yes, there are a lot of hurdles, and I'm sure that my colleagues on the panel can agree with that. Shipping is extremely infrastructure heavy, and as these gentlemen said, Johannes specifically said, we're talking about ships that will be operating 25 plus years from now, and so not only is it extremely expensive, it's a relatively long lifespan, and yeah, that's very challenging. But having said that, I've just a bit of context. I worked in the clean shipping, very micro niche industry for 12 years straight, and I'm a sailor and master by training. So master meaning of ships, not taken out of context. But so this is something I've really focused on for the past 12 years straight, and I think what we're going to see, because of this heavy infrastructure that we can't really deny, is that I think we're likely going to see some leapfrogging of technology and a sort of non-linear path towards a zero carbon future. And what I mean by that is, you can take an example that believe is applicable also to South Africa, but a lot of countries that wouldn't have had the opportunity to have phone lines. So if you think about your home phone, that's a lot of physical asset-heavy infrastructure, right? Like the telephone poles and that sort of thing. And so a lot of countries never had a home phone, like a telephone line. And yet they were able to, when it was available, leapfrog that. They never had a telephone, and yet now they have some of the strongest 5G networks in the world, and everybody has a cell phone. And so I think we're going to see comparable leapfrogging of technology, and not only technology, applications. And I'll just continue for a second here, talking about long-term. So shipping industry, very long-term, very asset-heavy. You know, it's glacial, it's Goliath, these are the words we use. But at the same time, it's not that long of a vision that the shipping industry has. So when I take into account an inspiration I have, which is from the Haida Nation, which is from Haida Gwaii on the west coast of Canada, and I learned a lot about their forestry laws. I'm really into planting trees and forestry. And a lot of places have forestry laws that are 100 years or something like that, and we consider that a pretty long-term investment. But the Haida Nation has a 1,000-year forestry management plan, which is actually backed by the nation of Canada. And their 1,000-year forestry management plan inspires me to look a little farther down the line. And personally, I believe as we look a little farther down the line, we're probably going to be moving away from biomass, biofuels, whether we describe biofuels that we say today, but we also acknowledge crude oil as a form of a biofuel, which is from biomatter in plants and animals, and moving into kind of skipping that step and looking at, this is going to sound hippie, celestial energy, which would be lunar, solar, and planetary, or solar, wind, tidal, and gravitational, which is, of course, I'm forgetting the word, the Earth is hot, geothermal. Thank you.
So Johannes, what do you have to say to that?
I think that's very long term, and I think we talked about that previously. It's not mutually exclusive. We do need things that are ready to scale now, to have impact now, and there is, now us being based in Africa, there's such a massive difference between, look for instance at EVs in Europe, they've got a good case, but in South Africa we're living through where 7.5 hours a day there is no electricity coming out of the wall socket. Let alone 500-kilometer long gravel roads that don't have gas stations, let alone charging points. So we do need both in the end. And I think that until we, even with leapfrogging and all the likes, there is enough longevity of our solutions to make it a solid business case. We'll need it long enough.
Okay, thank you for that. So moving to, how the venture space can support the scaling of new solutions. We've heard how, with regard to Miguel's Z-Box, that there's caution from some of the large shipping companies. How can you, as a strategic investor, help these technology solutions scale up and again, punch through the industry's inertia to change?
It's a 800-pound gorilla question. And the answer is we don't have a magic wand either, right? Of course, what we look for in teams when we invest in, of course, we look at technology that at first is in itself very scalable by the nature of it. So we have to have a decent size market, and then we need to, in the end of the day, it's a very economic argument as well. We always say nothing will scale to real impact as well unless it's a very profitable solution. It needs to be, if we're trying to transition the industry and saying this is the green premium, what we always call it the green premium version, this will not scale. It is something yes, there will be, we are here in Monaco and in Berlin, and there's very green-minded people that are willing to pay a premium price, but that's not the entire world. And we're talking now on a very cost-competitive industry like shipping. Unless your solution is economically very viable, it's unlikely to scale. So we had a bit of a chat about this before as well, and I asked him, so what are the current costs? Where do you see the costs going? And this is where everybody will look at as an investor too. Do we see a way to shave off the green premium, where this just simply becomes the economically and ecologically viable solution? This is where it is. So for him, now for Miguel in particular, I think it seems like there is a pathway for him to reach this. So what we help with as VCs, other than capital, we exactly try to work out with the entrepreneur a step-by-step plan on how to reach this. And this is often a lot, and I had a few conversations about this here in the room as well before, about financing these first of a kinds. Yeah? This is a challenge that every entrepreneur should really embrace, understand that this is a key thing you have to get right. And the initial, Miguel also mentioned it already, said, okay, we have the equity portion of it, but soon also we need to come in, and it is also definitely possible in this space because we have a lot of political tailwind, a lot of public money coming in the space. See how much money can I get from grants, from low interest debt or anything like that. So there are tools available, but there's no blanket answer. I can't say this is always the way we do it. It depends on the industry, it depends on the actual case where we're in. But yeah, this is something we really pay a lot of attention to when we invest into any of these companies. How do we shave up green premium? How do we finance this first of a kind unit? Yeah? And then a step-by-step scale-up plan.
Okay, that's good advice. When talking about the green premium, I mean, one way we can tackle this is if, of course, governments price in negative externalities. And so this is a general question to the panel. Can governments be doing more? Governments doing more with either carbon taxes, with either limitations on the combustion engine. We've seen California make a move there, Europe in discussion here. What can governments do to help scale this technology, these solutions?
I mean, a lot, yeah. Regulation is really, as always in this space, one of the major keys. Maybe, Johannes, you can probably give a pretty good example about this.
Yeah, so I think for us it's a very positive thing that both the EU and good parts of Asia have been including shipping into the emissions trade. And they've been wise enough to include the approach and departure, at least partially as well. And that's where then us sitting in Africa, where there's very little governmental support for various reasons, comes in handy because we're like geostrategically placed in the middle of that typical trade route between Asia and Europe, where we can create and supply the fuels halfway along the way for that. So that's where the European or Asian governments' regulations are helping even us down there and at the Cape to make a business case.
And if I may, is that okay? I would also like to say that there's a huge opportunity for governments to sort of lead the way and make sure that they are demonstrating a precedent that it's a positive thing, right? And of course, I can look to the Bahamas, which we've talked about so much, Blue Action Lab in Freeport, Grand Bahama, which is where we're registered, and the infrastructure and the regulatory frameworks there that are being put in place to help to advance this. It's very powerful. And Veer, when we're launching our fleet, intends to have our vessels flagged in the Bahamas, thereby assisting them and having it as the largest green shipping fleet in the world, so the largest green registry in the world, and also the largest green hydrogen fleet in the world would all be Bahamian flagged. And so in that way, because they are helping us, we can help to elevate the stance of the Bahamas as a green leader internationally.
Fantastic. Miguel?
In our case, it's very... in our case, it's very clear because I think the main strategy of the shipping lines is to leave the container empty on the destiny, waiting to have cargo to make the comeback trip with cargo. So governments can apply some tariffs, to penalize the storage of empty containers. For example, the United States made that during the pandemic because of the congestion of empty containers in the area of LA. So it's clear if they need to move empty containers because governments have regulated it, for me is a good job because they will need to optimize this movement. Of course, they can do things. Government has a very main role in that.
And staying on the government, the public sector side, we heard in an earlier panel about blended finance, using public sector money as catalytic money, as leverage to attract, of course, private investments, so public-private partnership. Could we be doing more here? Organizations like the IFC and development agencies across Europe, the US, we heard about the Green Climate Fund. Should there be a greater focus both on providing and making it easier, right? That's the other, making it more accessible and easier to deal with multilateral organizations and the bilateral financing organizations. Are they focused enough on this area?
As someone who is a fundraiser for green shipping, so I'm also the founder of a company called Sail Cargo Incorporated. We are building the largest ship of any kind in the history of Costa Rica. Check them out on Instagram at Sail Cargo. We raised $6 million US cash equity for them, cash investments. And through VEER, in terms of equity, but also sweat equity, we've raised approximately 1.4 million. And 100% of that has been from private impact investors. And I have not been successful at securing anything other than that, despite great amounts of effort. So I hope that will change, but I will say that I find it very difficult as someone who has raised nearly $7 million.
Wow. And how about your experience?
Yeah, so as mentioned previously, the South African government, for instance, is completely strapped for cash. So they support infrastructure that, for instance, US startups have. We don't see that. So we are largely relying on private capital and largely from outside the country, most of it seemingly coming from Europe or the US, as a matter of fact. And yeah, the multilaterals it's oftentimes it takes too much time. Like in the early stage, it needs to be, I think, smaller amounts, more easily available, cash in hand would be high impact.
Okay. Are there international organizations to help raise this topic, the urgency for solutions here? Are there maritime organizations that could be helpful in addressing the funding gap?
I don't know them.
Okay.
I know, so I'm very happy to say that I have had the help of the European Union. If we have in the stage we are, is thanks to that. We have already also mixed public loans, grants, and private investment. And I think they have made a good job in that sense, but I think there is a gap for the scalability of the projects. And in that way, we are now applying an EIC accelerator, but I think they need to do much more in that sense, in that way, because there is a gap between the early investment or early help, but we need to scale up the project that we have, and we need more help in that way.
Thank you. Sebastian, 2022 was a year where sustainability, sustainable finance, ESG investing, received a big backlash for many reasons. I mean, of course, there were macroeconomic headwinds, but you also saw ESG being politicized, especially in the US. You also saw some performance issues where some ESG or ESG portfolios underperformed mainstream indices. What is the fundraising? What is the LP arena like today when you yourself, are raising money, to focus on climate? Have you seen any sort of loss of momentum amongst LPs in focusing on sustainability strategies?
Interesting question, yeah. Well, the answer is actually no. Let's be where we came from. When we started a climate-first venture capital firm in 2018-19, our friends thought, oh, they became tree huggers now. This was the initial reaction. They thought, oh, philanthropy, that's a great thing you're doing. So, but we actually had no philanthropy in mind. We were really saying we're going to drive this profitably. We don't actually see any way for something to reach significant scale without being a very profitable business. So that was the first thing. We knew, this is great that we think this way, and our money, unfortunately, is limited. And we also had a bunch of friends, I guess, but we knew if we want to be successful, we'll have to get the institutional capital, mobilize that institutional capital towards climate. This will be your only chance to make it. So we had initial conversations, this 2019, and of course the reaction was like, first time team, first time fund, please call me at fund generation 4 or 5. Okay, so this was, but now luckily I'm here today and actually say it has changed dramatically over the last years. Now we are basically seeing more and more institutional capital, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies, actually having dedicated pockets for Article 8 and 9 funds under European regulation. In the US it's a bit different, but we see really more and more. And we've seen quite a few funds being able to raise money now. And we also operate a fund of funds, by the way, where we did exactly this. We actually seeded about 10 funds by now. Yeah, we're really early in money, saying this is what we need. Again, 2018, 19, we were also lonely. There was not much out there. So we said, if we want to create a dent in climate, we have to bring in more people and make this an ecosystem. So I would actually answer your question. No, I'm actually positive. I think we are seeing a lot of momentum going into this at the moment. Every week, really, I hear from more LPs saying, I actually have now dedicated pockets towards it. A few years ago, it was like, yes, we're looking at the space, maybe we're working on it. That's still an answer we hear often, but it's definitely getting also better that more and more institutional capital is coming in. And in terms of the bubbles or ESG sort of being complicated on returns, I would make that actually more down to the indices and what they include to be ESG. Because of a lot of things that we see in these indices, we would definitely not categorize as impact businesses.
That's for sure. Well, that's good to hear that the momentum continues, that there is still a strong institutional focus on investing in sustainable businesses. Thank you so much. We're now going to open up for audience questions. So please, the gentleman right there.
Yeah, hi. Thanks very much, everybody. I'm Richard Hickson. I'm a consultant in critical care medicine, and I'm a co-founder of Healthcare Ocean. And my questions, there's two of them, Danielle, are for you. I'm probably one of the only physician environmentalists who have an obsession with clean container shipping, because we spend 70 billion with 80,000 suppliers delivering healthcare equipment and pharmaceuticals into the NHS. And my vision is that we do not accept them being shipped in unless those ships have the lowest environmental impact possible, because we need healthy oceans. It's not just... However, we're talking carbon, I get that, but we know that net zero is the difference between emissions and sequestration. So I'm quite interested in the holistic view to ocean health. So looking at the IMO, thinking about marine mammal collision and underwater radiated noise. So, Danielle, are hydrogen engines quieter than their heavy fuel oil counterparts? And when you plan your first ocean journey, will you do so with speed and route in mind to minimize the risk of collision with ecosystem engineers such as great whales?
Thank you so much for that question, and I am so glad to hear that you hope that you can have containers that are clean shipped, and please be in touch. The NHS would be awesome to speak to. So the first part was essentially a question about bioacoustic pollution and the mechanical propulsion that we will use versus a standardized combustion engine. And bioacoustic pollution is something that is one of the sort of 8, I guess, approximate boxes that we tried to tick, whether that is talking about invasive species or if we're talking about air or water pollution. Bioacoustic pollution or underwater noise is a very big deal, especially for whales, and that can impede or completely disrupt their communication. And so I'm trying to go through, because I don't want to, if I've missed something, let me know. But essentially, we'll be using electric motors. And electric motors, which I've had the opportunity to work in Iceland on a project with a sailing ship, quite a large vessel with pure electric. It is so silent that it scares the people on board. Like the people were holding on to the ship because there were no sails set and there was no noise and no vibration, and so people were frightened that they were moving, and it was literally ghosting along because it was so silent. So in that way, the bioacoustic pollution is eliminated. Another part of that, though, is something called cavitation. And cavitation is when a propeller spins, it actually creates a vacuum, and I'm not a scientist, somehow that makes water boil underwater. I'm not sure. But it creates explosions of mini little bubbles underwater. And this is another form of bioacoustic pollution. And our vessel will have that. When we choose to use our propeller, there will still be cavitation. Having said that, we can optimize our propeller to essentially have a larger diameter or surface area to spin slower and reduce the cavitation and therefore reduce the bioacoustic pollution. And so that's my answer. And then how will we avoid hitting whales? I frankly don't have an answer for that because it is very challenging. But essentially, yeah, so hitting whales is a big problem. Whales are the cause of many yachts sinking mysteriously. Also, containers at sea are the same cause, but whale strikings obviously are not good and cause the death of the whale. I do know that on the east coast of the United States, there are right whale protection areas. And so if anyone, master or captain, sees a whale, or a person on their boat sees a whale and they think it is a right whale, they can call that in and the Coast Guard will announce that that is a mobile protected zone instantly around that whale. And I sailed under a captain who said something really great. He says, you know, sometimes I don't know if it's a right whale or a wrong whale, and I still just call it in. And then we have a mobile protection zone around them. So I would encourage the captains of our fleet to not know if it's the right whale or the wrong whale, and still just call it in.
Fantastic. Do we have any more questions?
So I'm Carsten Spieker. I'm from the company GEA. And there was a question, is there is an international organization in the shipping industry? There is. It's the IMO. And the IMO targets are to reduce the CO2 emissions, or the greenhouse gas emissions, to at minimum 40% until 2030. It's a question if this is enough. This is for sure a big question mark, but there is something, and I fully agree to Sebastian. Only with international pressure and legacy, that every government is forced to move ahead, that this can work. And here for sure we have to do more. And the question I have, do you also think there was a very little discussion about this e-fuels? You mentioned at one time, Sebastian, but do you not see there a big chance with wind energy, with sun energy, and with also alternative water energy to convert green electric power into fuel?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, of course, and here the gentleman writes doing that as well. We actually categorize it all of wind energy is also a form of solar energy in the end of the day. You know, it's the sun that generates the pressure differences and hence wind, so it's all for us kind of in the same box. But anyway, that's an energy theory. But yes, of course, I mean, I didn't mention that maybe so much before. I said we are investing into e-fuels companies today, but we're also investing into everything left and right of it. Yeah? So we're investing into companies that create green hydrogen, because of course the basis of any hydrocarbon is green hydrogen. Or we're investing into companies that actually produce carbon in one way or the other. Yeah, either direct air capturing companies or other companies. So yes, of course, we see a lot. So the biofuel route is a very valid route too. We are keen on the fuel side on stuff that does not need retrofit. So I think that there's a bit of debate in the maritime industry right now. What's the future fuel? There's a whole bunch of people betting on methanol. Yeah, there's others that are betting on ammonia, specifically green ammonia. When you see the sort of engine manufacturers, MAN and the Finnish guys, so they are betting seems to be more on ammonia, frankly. We're a little bit, he mentioned earlier on, today's infrastructure is being built today, yeah, and is the infrastructure same as in 2050, as Johannes said, so we're missing the retrofitting character in these, so we would predominantly invest in technologies that are retrofittable. Again, it doesn't mean that we should not continue to innovate in ammonia, but as I said, time value of carbon, we want to get faster decarbonization results. And we don't think we have the luxury to wait until we have built an entire fleet of 50,000 ships, container ships on the oceans, and turn them into hopefully Veer products. Yeah? Again, we should also do that. But yes, I mean, e-fuels, anything that's retrofittable, biofuels, e-fuels for us, preferable. Again, question is cost, and also a bit of a question is energy density here. Yeah? The beauty of LNG is it's a very high energy density, and we can use it. The downside of methanol, for example, is roughly half the energy density, means I need double the size of tanks. Ammonia is a similar story, it's half the energy density. Sometimes it's more of a beer or red wine discussion a bit, but sometimes we look at what humanity's progressed through. We started to burn biomass, you know, this was set us apart from the dinosaurs, and we moved on to move ever more energy dense. And now, as we sort of realize it's actually a problem, carbon consumption is actually a problem, we're moving actually downhill again, kind of, yeah. The solutions, battery is very poor energy density, and ammonia and methanol actually also, so we're actually moving downhill. It's not the great scenario, so maybe just perspective, we do work quite a bit with the energy companies as well on these topics. And I think there the bet is kind of clear. If you look at what the large oil and gas companies are betting on today and what they're investing in today, it's e-fuels and biofuels. Those are the two things that are dominant in terms of, yeah, of course they have a favor for these things because that's what they used to do. They know hydrocarbons. But yeah, that's something to definitely keep in mind because I'm not sure it's smart betting against those guys that have, at the moment at least, all the money.
Thank you for that. So I think we're pretty much out of time. So if you have just like 10 seconds for your next comments, but please, because I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to chip in there as well because our byproduct is CO2, obviously, which is surprisingly valuable at the moment as a product. And we'll use that long run to synthesize it with the hydrogen and actually give meaning and energy density to it to produce methanol or e-fuels. And when you talk to the shipping companies, it's quite clear that the future is a multi-fuel future. So there is no competition between the fuels because we're thinking about roughly about 6 to 8 different types of fuels that the future will have.
Thank you.
And just quickly in closing, something to note is that essentially we're talking a lot about commodifiable fuels versus non-commodifiable fuels, such as renewables, which is a very big deal for people who are interested in selling energy. So just take that away and think about that. And just in closing, I wanted to say that I asked for advice on this because our panel was super fiery in our pre-call. And I asked for advice from the founder of the Ocean Opportunity Lab, of which Veer is a new member. And she just encouraged me to say that it really doesn't matter because we need to make change now. There is room for everybody, and we don't know what the future will hold, so we can just invest in anything that's working towards a cleaner future. So thank you.
Great way to close it. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. It was a great panel.
Thank you. Thank you so much to you, Desiree. Thanks again to everyone on that panel about sustainable shipping. All right, we have one more panel now until our coffee break. This one is going to be focusing on the future of coastal infrastructure. I'm delighted to be hosting this one myself. Can I please call on stage my 5 panelists? Can I have Borge Bjorneklet, Tom Burbeck, William Jansen, Maya Kasipov, and Shruti Iyengar? Guys, come on up, please. All right, Borge here. Oops. All right, welcome to you all. Hello, hello, hello. Same thing, you guys know how this goes. We'll talk for a bit and then we'll open it up to your questions. I think you're going to see that one of the key things needed for long-term resilience and prosperity for our coastal communities, of course, is great infrastructure. 4 of our panelists are experts in really exciting new areas of coastal infrastructure design and development. I'm going to introduce you to them first, just very briefly. We've got Borge Bjorneklet, who's the founder and CEO of Ocean Sun, which is based on an invention for floating solar panels. Tom Burbeck, the founder and CEO of Arc Marine, which is an eco-engineering company on a mission to accelerate reef creation on an unprecedented scale. William Jansen, the founder and CEO of Desalinator, a company that specializes in sustainable solar-driven desalination. Maya Kashipov, who's on the business development team at Captura. Captura harnesses the power of the ocean to draw down planet-warming CO2 through something called direct ocean capture approach. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And of course, to get some input on investing in climate tech, we have Shruti Iyengar. Shruti's an investment manager at Future Planet Capital, where she works on UK innovation and Science Seed Fund, as well as the Blue Ocean Mandate. And full disclosure, FPC has invested in Captura, so we'll talk a bit more about that later. So welcome to all of you. Before we get into the details of your solutions, we need to take a closer look first at the stakes. What are the real stakes when it comes to coastal infrastructure? So first of all, just very briefly, I'd like you all to tell me a little bit about the situation, what you're trying to solve at the moment, and what your personal eureka moment was when you decided to try and change things. So I don't know, maybe William, we can start with you. You lived in Abu Dhabi for several years. You said you were used to drinking desalinated water, but that's usually made in large machines. It uses up lots of energy. Tell us about your eureka moment to do it in a more sustainable way.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I lived in Abu Dhabi for a number of years, and at the time, the way that desalinated water was made was by cogeneration, so burning a lot of gas and taking the waste heat and applying that waste heat to convert seawater into drinking water. And in my head, I had been tinkering with the idea of using solar panels for this specific application. And I don't know if any of you know this, but a solar panel converts only 15% of the energy of the sun into electricity. 85% is lost in the form of heat. And I won't go into detail, but the basic idea of a desalinator is to use both the 15% and the 85% in a combined availability of energy to achieve the goal of desalination, and then to do that without the use of toxic chemicals and without the creation of toxic brine.
Okay. Tom, how about for you? Was it your experience as a commercial diver in the past that made you want to help change coastal erosion, make things better?
Yeah, exactly. So I've been diving since the age of 13, and like most people at Arc Marine, we've all been divers, so we've seen firsthand sort of 2 things. One is the degradation of our marine ecosystems, both in coastal and in subsea habitats, but also that there was pretty shoddy man-made infrastructure which was being deployed into the ocean, which we saw as low-hanging fruit. We thought if we can change this, tweak this slightly, we could actually be doing a net benefit to the marine environment at the same time as growing our coastal defences, offshore energy sites. And I think that's what the most exciting thing for us is. If we want to achieve impact at scale, which a lot of us in the room do, you need to find the size of the projects which are at scale. And there's very few projects which match the size of those big civil engineering projects which we see offshore.
Maya, how about for you? Talk us through carbon removal.
I think in the climate space, what's really at stake is the recognition for the necessity of carbon removal. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has affirmed that reducing our emissions is no longer sufficient. We also have to pair those emissions reduction efforts with mass carbon removal if we're to secure a safe climate. So right now there is a lot of focus on emissions reductions. We need to be prioritizing carbon removal just as much. So it's really those accumulated emissions that are sitting in our atmosphere, warming our planet, that we really have to draw down. Once we understand that, we'll see that we have a real, available, viable tool to address the emissions in the atmosphere and to remove any type of emission from anywhere and at any point in time.
Borge, solar energy is among the most affordable of all the renewables. The problem, of course, is the sheer size. It takes up so much land. Tell us about that and how the idea for ocean sun came up for these floating power plants.
Yeah, so myself and many of my colleagues, our background is from the Norwegian solar PV industry, producing a lot of silicon metal in Norway, and working in REC Solar, among the largest in Europe, and 15 years ago. Before that, industry went to Asia. And then working for a period in offshore maritime sector, deep water drilling. So our company is sort of a mutation of these two industries, the maritime and the photovoltaic, and we're designing what we believe is the most efficient way to deploy large utility-sized solar farms at the sea, near coastal areas and hydroelectric power dams, and very well suited to the archipelagos, the island communities that otherwise use a lot of fossil fuel.
Okay, we're going to talk more about each of your solutions a bit more in detail in just a minute. But before we do that, Shruti, I just want to bring you in here. Give us the lay of the land. We've been talking a lot about impact investing, but you were telling me that this is really the year for ocean and water tech. Why is that?
That's my year for ocean and water tech, yeah. I hope it's everyone's year. Well, I think what we've seen in climate tech in general, right? I think the previous panel, we've spoken about it, but essentially we've seen a massive inflow of capital into climate over the last 2 years. And I think what's ended up happening is the percentage of capital going into specifically, let's say, ocean, which is part of climate, is still quite small, is very, very insignificant. But I think slowly people are realizing that it's almost like going back to the basics. And I think people are realizing that biodiversity and ocean are sort of the two completely untapped, unlooked at, sort of spaces to invest in. And the sheer scale at which things can be done if you can just crack the unit economics, I think that is what is very exciting for people now. So it feels like this year, while I know that in general, the market, it's been relentless, one thing after the other that's happened. And I have to say upfront that I have so much respect and regard for every innovator and entrepreneur who's been resilient through the last 18 months, right? And I think what I can say for sure is while a lot of climate funds have been raised, a lot of dry powder is there. It's just the pace of deployment has stalled. But as fund economics work, you have a life on the fund. You need to deploy it by a certain period, so that deployment will happen. So the prediction is sort of in the next sort of 6 months odd, it'll pick up again, or 12 months odd, it'll pick up again, and then there'll be a lot more money going towards ocean and biodiversity, even within the climate agnostic climate fund, sorry.
Okay. All right, so let's dive a little bit deeper into the solution so you can all understand exactly what we're talking about. Maya, let's start with capture. What exactly is direct ocean capture, and how is it different or better than direct air capture?
Capture harnesses the carbon removal powers of the oceans to draw down planet-warming CO2 from the atmosphere. So we're really utilizing the natural carbon equilibrium between the atmosphere and the ocean. The only inputs that we need for our process are renewable energy and ocean water, and we do that with no byproducts produced, and we're not adding any chemicals to the water. Fundamentally, we add nothing and we take nothing from the oceans, and because of that, we feel that we're ready to deploy today. Our technology is different because we do have a measurable stream of CO2 that we remove from ocean water, so that makes that MRV piece a little bit easier for us. And then that resulting CO2, just like direct air capture, can be sequestered safely and permanently underground, or we can utilize it in low carbon products.
Okay, and that's a really interesting point about measuring, which we're going to get into in detail a little bit later.
Yeah, and just to give some more context on the ocean front, one thing I'll also add to that is our ocean benefit at capture is really twofold. So we are drawing down CO2 emissions from the atmosphere, and that's helping to address climate change, which is driving ocean acidification to begin with. But we also have applications in localized deacidification. So we're not just addressing the source of ocean deacidification or ocean acidification to begin with, but we're also countering it by actively working to deacidify in localized areas.
Tom, how about for you? Give us some details on Arc Marine, particularly the reef cubes, how they work.
Yeah, so our flagship product is our Reef Cube technology, which is patented. And we've initially designed it to serve the use cases of major offshore energy developers and coastal defense developers. And what it enables the end user to do is, whilst at the same time they're building out offshore wind farms, for instance, where you can see from the picture their needs are for cable protection, scour protection, potentially eco-moorings. What we can do is we can convert the developer into a marine restorer simultaneously, which we don't think has ever been done before. So the product is made of 98% recycled materials using waste products from the clay and granite industry. We're 91% less CO2 because we don't contain any cement whatsoever. And we use really clever surface textures specific for certain species, like native oysters, which means that we can really be specific on what we're trying to target. And to give you an idea on some of the numbers, the biggest wind developer in the world spends 60 million euros in 2021 on subsea protection. Now, if we can get them spending 60 million euros on subsea protection, which has a benefit as a reef, then we've suddenly got a customer who is actively now restoring the ocean. And from our perspective, we found it really hard when we started to try and get anyone to fund marine conservation just for marine conservation benefits. It's normally been done by a few big NGOs, some philanthropists, but what we see now is that whilst we push out for, in Europe, it's 450 gigawatt of offshore wind alone. They spend approximately 10 million euros per gigawatt. So it's a $1 billion industry that we could convert into marine conservation. So that's us. Our three main impact metrics for our product are pretty easy. So it's habitat per meter squared that we create, the amount of recycled content that we deploy, repurpose, and secondly, the carbon saved using our materials.
Thanks for that. Borg, on your website, it says Ocean Sun has revolutionized floating solar power production. How does that work? How'd you do that?
Yeah, well, the technical challenge for floating solar is to provide a vessel or a carrier for the solar panels in a cost-efficient manner. You can have a large barge or a steel barge and put them on top, but it will be too costly. So what we have done is to build these very thin membranes. These are hydroelastic membranes that sit on the water. This is one of our first systems. It was powering aquaculture system in Norway on the west coast there. They have a huge diesel consumption on those feeding barges, so it directly reduces that consumption. And now more, they are much larger and also multiple rings, so they make up a utility-sized system. And also from this system, we utilize the direct thermal contact with the water body, so the temperature in the solar cells is reduced, and thereby you have a better yield from the system. And on freshwater reservoirs, it's important that we can reduce the evaporation, so you can contain the valuable freshwater better also. And these systems have also the ability to cope with adverse weather. We have installed in the Philippines, directly in the typhoon belt, typhoon category 4. And also we are now building outside Singapore. Singapore have huge problems with the high cost of land, same as almost like in Monaco, that you cannot build a big solar farm on land. So you have to utilize the ocean space where you have much more surface area. And another particular one that we heard in the session earlier today with the ecotourism, take Maldives, for instance, almost 200 islands. The 5-star resort hotels, they are now moving into floating solar to power these hotels instead of the diesel generators. So they're sitting on a tremendous energy source in the lagoons and on the relatively small islands there.
Thank you. William, we touched on it before, but I was surprised to learn that more than 5% of global greenhouse emissions are made by desalination, and desalination plants generate a significant amount of toxic chemicals. So given all of that, how is desalinator different from those other purification technologies?
Yeah, thank you. I do not want to be negative, but if we look at sea bodies that are closed and that give us an opportunity to measure, and I will specifically take you in this example to the Persian or Arabian Gulf. The countries around the Gulf are dependent on that water for their livelihood because they need to desalinate this water to sustain themselves. But the negative effect of the desalination that is happening around the shores has already seriously impacted that sea body. The sea is basic. The Arabian Gulf is dying, and this will happen in the foreseeable future. And this is due to the chemicals that are being used by the desalination plants, and the heating of the water that's constantly happening due to the desalination plants. So what desalinator tries to do is basically to remove these two problems. We do not use any harmful chemicals in our process. That is the first step. That means that we can progress with the activity without continuing the pollution. And then secondly, we offer our customers the opportunity to go straight from seawater to salt. So this is something that our colleagues in the industry avoid, but we offer this as an integrated product solution. So we say, yes, the water might be slightly more expensive because you're doing an extra step, but we do not bring any pollutive, toxic brine back to the sea. We leave the marine environment in peace, and we give you solid salt.
We're going to talk about financing a bit more with you, Shruti, in a minute, but I just want to ask the four of you about the biggest challenges for each of you. Tom, for example, how do you appease the engineering side of a construction project? I mean, are companies reluctant to get on board with something like Arc Marine?
I think it's in engineers' nature to be risk adverse to a certain degree. So in the very early days, you know, they like their proven solutions, whether that be granite or traditional concrete, where everybody knows the compressive strength, everybody knows the durability, they've seen it in the water for decades, so they can really sort of hang their hat on it and say, this is what I trust. But I think now they don't really have a choice. So even the engineers themselves are under pressure to find sustainable solutions, incorporating nature-based principles. And that's really only came on since we've been in the industry, probably in the last 3-4 years. That's when we've seen a real push. So I think the answer is there's still a bit of work to really convince the engineers that nature-based solutions can perform the same, if not better, than traditional methods. But it's definitely changed in the last few years.
Do the rest of you find that as well, that there is a lack of awareness just about the tech itself? For example, the energy industry is notoriously conservative. Ocean Sun's a bit radical. I mean, have people been able to get past that? Was that challenging?
Yeah, everything in the energy sector is quite conservative and challenging, I would say. And we have been working for 7 years now with the class societies and certification bodies and to approve all this. And in the end, then insurance company will trust this, and then the final bankability is in place. I think this is now, and you have run the full-scale demonstration systems for several years. So the technology is now available. I think also finances, there's a lot of interest in financing this type of initiative. But in many states, it is a problem with the regulatory and the administration of this and the permitting. And I would say maybe particularly so in Europe, a little bit more easy in Southeast Asia. But I would say the main obstacle in Europe is regulation.
We'll talk a bit more about regulation in just a minute. Maya, I just want to ask about Captura and about what Captura does to address the cost challenge, because obviously that's always a huge challenge for a company. I know you were telling me that electrodialysis is the secret sauce. What does that mean exactly? And again, back to this point of awareness, is that a secret sauce that's easy to sell when people have to kind of get their minds around what exactly that is?
Sure. So our proprietary electrodialysis technology at Captura was developed at Caltech. So we have some really great professors that have put a lot of time into ensuring its efficiency, and that's really, like you said, the secret sauce of the system and the key cost enabler there. When we were talking about direct air capture earlier, one thing that's important to see in that solution is, it's definitely going to be part of the climate toolbox, but it does have high costs associated with it. Our approach at Captura to lowering those costs is to say, well, instead of building out all these fans, all these absorbents, all these air contactors that direct air capture does, we step back and think, well, wait a minute, we already have a huge, natural, existing, proven, and free ocean carbon removal device that already covers 70% of the planet. and that's the ocean. So the ocean already does so much of that carbon removal work for us, so that substantially eliminates cost at a very fundamental level. And we're also utilizing off-peak energy, so we only need to run the electrodialysis for 6 hours a day to generate the acid and the base that we need to power the rest of the system for the rest of the 24 hours of the day. So both of those things really enable that low cost. Yeah.
Another big challenge, of course, is attracting investment. We've been talking about this a lot over the past 2 days. William, you've been doing this a long time. Do you feel like it's easier today? Has it gotten better at all to attract impact investors?
Yeah, I think it has. I think it also has to do with the growth of your company. There is definitely a risk adverseness, and once the technology is proven, it becomes significantly easier to get access to funding from impact investors. Yeah, we have an example here of impact investors and startups coming together, so that is definitely good news. But yeah, the message to impact VCs, in my opinion, needs to remain: put your money where your mouth is, and take the risk.
So Shruti, that's a perfect transition toward you.
I should have like calculated this when I was the only investor on a panel with 4 other founders. I should have been very well prepped.
No, but oftentimes we've been saying it, the seed money seems to come easily at the beginning in climate tech, but it does seem it's that next round where things get a little scary. Tell us about that and where FPC comes in.
Yeah, I think, so just to set the context, Future Planet, we've been around, well, the Blue Ocean Mandate is backed by the Monaco Foundation, it's backed by the government of Monaco, and we, overall in Future Planet as well, we've got a couple of other funds that we have, which are backed by governments and which are backed by sovereign wealth funds and so on. It all comes down to also your LPs being quite patient. Right? And I think when your LPs are patient and you've got a 10-year fund, then you become a patient investor as well. And I think that's what we like to do. We like to be that patient investor who comes in at a point where we're willing to take the tech risk, we'll do the tech DD, we'll understand the tech, and then once we understand the risks we're taking, then we're willing to go on that journey with the entrepreneur. And I think it's to do with what the gentleman from Extantia was saying earlier as well. We're very hands-on. So we are quite involved with that next round of fundraise, helping you syndicate that next raise, helping you understand how the business model needs to be validated over the various stages, for instance. To your point earlier, I think the way the market's moved in the last year or so, we're seeing that it's serendipitous, but I think the pre-seed, seed stage of investing, as long as you're doing sort of climate investing, has been more insulated than the later stages of investing and other verticals of investing, if you may. And I think the hardest probably rounds at this point are sort of Series A, Series B rounds, where startups have done that first demo, first pilot, maybe at lab scale going into, for instance, capture or going into C at some point this year. And then, you get to that point where you now need to extend your runway and, you're raising your Series A. And then you're struggling because the market is not willing to take as much of a risk. So hopefully Future Planet Capital is going to be the home for many of these amazing innovators where, we do Series A, Series B through the Blue Ocean Mandate. And we've got investments across the board. We've got 4 investments in the portfolio so far, and we are deploying through the year. And we are looking for really sort of significant impact and, meaningful change. And we do it through sort of having our own score and impact value gap analysis before we even begin the process of DD. So we are measuring that impact while we're doing DD.
Just a question to come to the founders, just about how impact investors invest. I know in a perfect world you'd want them just to invest in anything that you invent, but do you think that they should change this eternal search for unicorns and not be looking for 100% solid return, or is that not realistic, Shruti? I don't know who would like to speak to that.
William had something to tell me at breakfast.
Oh yes, what was that?
Should I call you out?
No, it is my opinion,
yes.
Private opinion. I don't
here.
Speak for the solinator here. That the venture capital model and the word VC is very much something that is associated with the valley, with finding these 1000x investments where you invest in WhatsApp, and 2 months later someone buys it for 1,000 times what you valued it at. Those stories are difficult to achieve in the climate arena because we're talking about hard tech. We're talking about investments that can run investment cycles through a startup that can take a decade. And that means that there can be a very decent return on investment, but it is probably not going to be what we see in the valley. And the willingness for a venture capitalist to accept this at the front end of the discussion would be very helpful, so that we all know what we're talking about around the table.
All right, you've all been warned. Tom or Borge, would you like to weigh in on that?
I've got a slightly different take. So I'm all for the narwhal unicorn rhetoric. So the plans for Art Marine is to go through an IPO. And I think that's what we do need. I think we do need the same sexy stories that you get in tech companies. You need those inspirational companies where people look at it and go, the best brains say, I want to get into the marine space because I love the ocean, but I can also have a really good living and career and financial reward at the end. And that sort of, it's a full circle. So then more investors come in, it's more competitive. But just to go back to what parts investors with money for our companies is, I think it's linked to the previous question about regulatory and policy. So for instance, in offshore wind, we've noticed now that the policy and regulation is changing, that the bid criteria is moving from the cheapest or the most expensive lease is now who can actually do the best for the environment, which has never been done before. It's always been who's prepared to pay more for the seabed, and they will win the lease. So Holland Kust West, Site 6 in Holland was the first lease to do that. 60% of the bid criteria was on nature enhancement. So it shows you that that means then that companies like Art Marine are getting phone calls, how do we enhance the environment? We need to win this bid. There's an economic reason for them to do it. And then it's a lot easier to go to investors saying, hey, we're actually getting now calls from the customers. We're not pushing our product on them. They're being pulled to us by a regulatory change. And that's a lot easier then to have the conversations. But yeah, I'm all for more narwhals.
Okay.
So am I.
Borge?
Yes, well, in my company Oceans, we have been through several rounds, and in the first early days, it was a couple of philanthropists actually that invested. So, but now more companies listed, not on main list, but it's listed in Oslo Exchange. And but we have seen quite dramatic fluctuations in market prices for this type of. It's often broadly categorized as a tech company, and this is very low at the moment, and I guess a little bit difficult to get investments. But luckily, we don't need that, and it's soon approaching profitability, so even with the demo systems. Yeah.
So, of course, one thing that's incredibly important for investors, we touched on it earlier, is that they want to have some kind of proof. They want to have impact measurements. Shruti, talk to us a bit more about impact measurements and how it's evolved specific to coastal infrastructure, to tech.
Well, coastal infrastructure is very specific. And I think I was going to bring that up in the conversation earlier when Tom mentioned, the stuff to do with coral reefs, for instance, right? I think the time horizon has been one of the biggest challenges. When you look at a fund and you look at when an investor looks to get their return, and then you look at the projects and you look at the timeline for these projects and when the impact will be achieved. So for a very long time, because there's been a misalignment between the time horizon of the project and the time horizon of the fund investing into the project, it becomes challenging for investors to convince themselves that this is an investment that will bring them the returns, for instance. I think that's been a challenge for coastal community/infrastructure kind of support. But impact measurement specifically, so I think I've been doing this for about 8 years, and I'm based in London now. I've been doing it for 3 years in London, but I was previously in Singapore, and I was doing it in Singapore. So I've seen sort of the Asia and Europe kind of evolution of impact measurement. And back in the day, impact measurement was meant to be, was almost considered too onerous, too tedious, too painful. People would think of it as a bonus, nice to have. And I think over time, we've obviously had, the SDGs mapping, we've had the IRIS Plus metrics from Global Impact Investing Network. And now we've come to a point where, and then the IMP framework from Bridges, so there's been an evolution where everyone's trying to put together a set of metrics. And I think the most recent one by Thousand Ocean Startups, the Impact Navigator, and I've read through the whole piece because obviously it's great. And I think it's really amazing because I walked away after reading that piece. I felt like it was one of those pieces that was built by operators who understood the practicalities of impact measurement, and it wasn't built in, let's say, somebody who only comes from, let's say, an academic background. Because the crux of impact measurement, where it really falls through the cracks and has always fallen through the cracks, is when you're implementing it. Founders are firefighting, in their first 2 years. They don't have time to be sitting and doing reports. So it's almost, how do you make it easier for them, and what proxies can you tell them to measure while conducting their trials to collect the data that will eventually help them report on impact. So I think the Navigator piece and the case studies they've put together, the metrics they've put together, I don't think I've seen something that rigorous in a while.
That's interesting. What do you all have to say to that? Would that be something that would be helpful for you?
Yeah, no, I think by all means I couldn't agree more. For us as a startup, the bookkeeping of this is at the early stages not easy, because you are you're doing 15 things at the same time, and we sequester carbon, we save all sorts of things, we emit less so there are quite a few things to track, and this would indeed be the way to go.
I think it's also, if I may, it's also how investors look at impact measurement, right? If you try and make it onerous for your founders and you give them a template, or you give them a metrics that they need to measure against, and then you let them be, then it's going to be difficult. I think it's about, like, I previously used to do even earlier stage investing, and during that process, I used to always tell founders, it's fine, let's just do back of the envelope, put together an Excel sheet, 10 data points, 5 metrics, map them to 3 SDGs, let's just start with that. It's very simple. It's not meant to be difficult. And if it is difficult, then you're doing something wrong with it. So I think it's about making it also easier for them to understand the value of, I'm preaching to the converted. Everyone understands the value of it. But I think it's about making it easier for them to actually operationally do it on a daily basis without feeling like it's a burden. And then I feel like you can scale the metrics that you're reporting on then.
Speaking of scaling, what about making a profit? I know, Borge, Ocean Sun's financial results last year were good compared to the year before. What do you think made it work?
Well, it's the increasing interest for this type of technology, and it's actually much needed when looking at the electrification. Most people live along the coast. I think 85% of world population living on the coast in the mega cities and urbanizations, and these need short traveled power from floating solar, actually. And many places, like Singapore, for instance, there is no steady wind for the turbines, and they have ample surface area on the ocean, and this energy goes directly into a stiff grid in those cities, and the rooftops are used for gardens and terraces, and the land is for recreational area or agriculture. So I think we will see a tremendous shift in the sources of the decarbonization, and I'm 100% confident that we will have huge amount of floating solar energy, whether it will be our system or other. There are competitors also, but I think it has a fantastic future, actually, and it is fully possible to make this transition for the carbonization.
Tom, how about for Arc Marine? Most reef restoration projects are currently paid for by NGOs, by charities. How do you create something more scalable?
And that's exactly why we got into the nature-based solution aspect of it. So, our primary customer is a developer or is a big engineering company building like the land reclamation projects we see around the corner. And what that does, then it puts the onus on the customer to actually integrate that solution. So for us, we're probably not going to make a profit until 2025, which is where investment comes back into it again, because you need to bridge that gap. But I think it's that trade-off between, do you want to scale a company to be a global success and to take advantage of the upcoming developments, or do you want to focus on the profit. We obviously have to have a margin, which we've already got, and it's about bringing down the cost of the economics so we compete on a fair playing field with the traditional technologies. So, there is no way that these big companies are going to hit their net zero targets using cement. It's never going to happen. So what is the cost of using an eco version of cement, which may have a higher capex cost, but it achieves other targets, secondary targets? So that, I think, is still underexplored. I think we probably all know that we're not going to hit the targets, but we need to start making big ground going towards that. And there's still a green premium, which only comes down the longer a solution is there, and the more scale that you make it at.
William, Desolinator, you said you're hoping to grow it to 50 facilities a year. How are you going to get there?
Yeah, the good news is that I'm actually signing a contract for a new customer today in a circular agriculture application. Thank you very much. The facility will actually be showcased at COP28. So we're going to make, as I said, circular agriculture project. Everyone will get to taste circular strawberries at COP28. So it's a growth curve. It's the method at which we try to increase our order intake and the method at which we bring the product to the customer. Water as a service is the way to do that. Many of the people who are not having enough access to water also lack the money to buy the facilities to overcome the problem, but they do have enough money to pay for the water on a daily basis. So water as a service is, we believe, the solution to bring that water to the people, and we will grow steadily, and 50 installations per annum is definitely not an exaggerated goal.
We're going to open it up to your questions in just a minute. I just want to ask about synergies between different domains. Maya, for example, how do you see Capture fitting into the rest of the ocean community in the years to come?
We have great synergy with even everybody on the panel here today. Capture's technology can be attached to the back end of desalination plants. Their waste product is brine, and pure salt water is the input to our process. So we can take their waste product, removing their disposal costs, and then also using that as an input, running carbon removal alongside water purification. We're also going to need renewable offshore energy in order to power our systems, so that has great synergy with us as well. So we really see Captura fitting into a lot of existing ocean-based infrastructure, and will also help to build out new ocean-based infrastructure for the 21st century to supply the carbon removal we need to reach net zero.
Shruti, just before we go to the questions, everyone's on the previous panels has been asking when there's been the investor saying, what's the advice you'd give to the innovators in the room? But I want to kind of turn that on its head. What are red flags that investors should perhaps look out for in startups? Something that might say, whoa, I shouldn't go there.
Okay, team. I think team, we've spoken a lot about how team is very important. And I think, that is something that we are constantly looking at every time we make an investment, and it's much beyond just your accolades and your academic kind of background or your technical expertise, right? I think this year, if anything, has really taught us about resilience of founders. The number of companies at the earlier stages that have been closing down in the last, say, just 6 months within the climate tech space is disheartening, really. And unfortunately, it's a situation where if you don't get a bridge round in time, you're not able to extend your runway, you can't scale, you're kind of caught in that circle. And very often I've found that the difference has been how resilient the founder has been and how committed they've been to the mission that they set out to achieve. And I think obviously this room is filled with innovators who've been, who've set themselves on a mission, who are on missions that are going to take many, many years to get to, right? And so I think that's one big thing. And if we don't feel like the founder is in it for the right reasons, not committed to the mission, there isn't that willingness to hustle and to get through bad patches, then it would be a red flag for me. Another one would probably be how much they're raising. I'm not going to name names, but we have people coming to us saying, I will raise this much money at this valuation because the benchmarks in the market say that I should be raising this much. And the other 5 companies in my subsector or similar companies are also raising this much. And I think we always say, go back to brass tacks. How much money do you need and what do you need it for? And will you achieve the milestones in that time? Right? That is the amount you want to be raising with some buffer. It's not about how much other people are raising. You need to be so focused on using the money for the right reasons and deploying. At the end of the day, it is your shareholders are as committed to that mission, and you are kind of obligated to them as well. So those would be the red flags. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, who's got questions out there? Yes, right here, please. Thanks. Can you just tell us your name and your organization? Thank you.
Hi, Daniel Hoofd, Kelp Blue, so we grow seaweed in Namibia. And this is a great panel because we need energy, we need desalination without putting salt in the water. We have a lot of underwater infrastructure where we want to also create reefs, and we have offshore infrastructure where we'd like to leverage the ability to do things like deacidification. So I'd love to talk to all of you. Sorry, Shruti, we don't need money right now. I've been told that's the best way to get investors to come towards you. So if you want to hear more, we're presenting at the Oceanographic Museum tomorrow at between 9 and 12. We've got a sort of a whole panel about kelp and where the industry is. But my question is for Maya. We just signed an offtake agreement last week, which really sort of turbocharges where we are. What's the sort of scale of offtake agreement and what sort of pricing do you reckon you need to be able to make that sort of next big jump?
The Captura technology is inherently scalable, so it's really the use of the ocean, which is already covering 70% of the planet, that enables that. There really is no limit to scale. We can do carbon removal at any scale that the market demands in the future in order for us to reach net zero. So that's because we just need renewable energy and ocean water as inputs. Is your question just about what is it going to take for those offtake agreements to happen?
No, I suppose what I meant is what's the smallest scale that, I mean, you have a certain size of infrastructure and therefore a logical throughput that makes it economic, I assume.
Yeah, so right now we are building out first of a kind systems, so the costs right now aren't really representative of what they'll be in the future, but we are expecting through a lot of the LCA work, the TEA work that we've done, that we will be reaching a cost point of about $100 per ton or less at scale. But like I said, there's no limitation to how small or how big we can go. Right now, we're working through our piloting program to prove out the technology. We already have an end-to-end demonstration operational in Pasadena, California. That is a pilot that's removing 1 ton of CO2 from the atmosphere per year. That's going to be an 100 times scale up to our second pilot that's launching this summer, and then we'll move to an 1,000-ton scale pilot. We believe that that'll get our every component of the technology to a point where we're ready to deploy commercially, and then we will move into that commercial scale after that, where we definitely will be interested in some of those offtake agreements.
Thank you. Another question? In the house? Sorry. Don't be shy. Does anyone else have another question? All right, well, I guess then we'll just wrap up. Why don't each of you, just in a few sentences, tell me how you see or what you hope will be the future for both your business and the industry? I don't know, I'd like to start, Borja.
Well, I think it's a bright future. Many people, and especially young people, are concerned and learn about the global heating and adverse weather and everything. And I think being in the sector that can do something about this, and to increase on a large scale the use of renewables and the electrification of society, I think it's a fantastic place to be in, and great to work in that sphere, so to say.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, from a company perspective, we'd like to complete our pilots. We've just built our first manufacturing plant, which will enable us to produce 150,000 tons of reef cubes a year, turn over 12 million euros. So to get that plant up and running and to maximize it would be great. And then from an industry perspective, we'd like to see more of the tenders that we've seen in Holland, so more bridge criteria, not stating, we don't want to see any negative effects, we want to see positive effects. So putting the onus back on the developer to actually improve the environment is what we'd like to see more across the globe. And for the big players in the industry, the big energy companies, to make a pledge to say, you know, we're going to be building with nature moving forward on any new development. And at the moment, some of them are still thinking we don't have to do it. And that's not the attitude to have if we genuinely believe we're in a biodiversity crisis.
Thank you. Liam.
Yeah, where to start? No, I think that from our perspective, there is a lot of work to do. There is a lot of work to be done. I think for our specific niche, we have found a pathway to do it. Given that we are now in the phase where we start to roll out assets, we believe that the financiers will stand with us, and we look forward to reporting regularly on how much carbon we have saved and all the other metrics that we measure.
Thank you. Maya.
I think we'd like to see at Captura more recognition with the value proposition of carbon removal. A question that we get so often is, okay, well, you're drawing down CO2, but how are you making money? Where is the profit coming from? And so that really comes down to there being a cost to climate change. Economists worldwide have done a lot of assessments to see what this exactly will look like, and we know now that, you know, there's a cost to climate change that we either need to pay today or we're going to see a much higher cost in the future. So climate change solutions that have a low cost of production that can address emissions are going to be really valuable for us. If we look at aviation as an example, you know, in order to decarbonize that entire industry, we're going to have to build out an entire new fleet of electric planes, or maybe replace all the fuels with hydrogen. It's going to take some time, and it's really difficult to do. It's energy intensive, it's capital intensive, and it's time intensive. And with climate change, we just don't have that kind of time to wait. Carbon removal offers a way to address these emissions cheaper, faster, and on a non-disruptive basis. So if you approach the CEO of United Airlines, for example, and say, I can take care of these emissions for you at a fraction of the cost that it'll take you and at a fraction of the time, then there's a huge value proposition there. So in the end, the lower your cost of production, the higher that value proposition will be. At Captura, like I said, we have about an $100 per ton cost point that we're estimating at scale. And because of that low cost and inherent scalability of the solution, we really believe that we will emerge as what we hope to be one of, if not the lowest cost climate change solutions, and really be a major player in addressing net zero.
Thank you, Maya. Shruti, just a few words in closing.
What we're looking forward to was your question. Well, I think for specifically, I think as a sector, I'd love to see a lot more climate funds actually allocating pots for water tech. You know, anything that talks about anything that does something interesting in water, and acknowledging it as an important vertical within climate, which currently people are still playing catch up with. I think in terms of future plan and in terms of our blue ocean, we've made a few investments already, and I think what excites me the most right now is something to do with port infrastructure. So we haven't done something in that space. That's a really interesting space because we find that to be very often when we're looking at decks, one of the challenges tends to be that the port infrastructure is not green enough, or there's issues with that to enable the tech that goes into sea, for instance. So that will be an area that, you know, we're going to do a deep dive into. And then personally, I think for me, oceans are very, very close to my heart. I grew up in a coastal city. I've had lived experience through a tsunami. I understand, you know, the impact that it can have on families. I think for me personally, I'd love to do something I'd love to see a lot more in disaster risk resilience and building sort of resilience of coastal communities, and making that a viable business model and proving that you can create both positive impact while also making money, you know, through something in that space.
Great. Shruti, thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for that great panel on the future of coastal infrastructure. Thanks to all of you. It's now time for a quick coffee break. We're going to meet back here in 20 minutes' time for our final panel of the day. This will be on blue artificial intelligence, and we'll also have our closing remarks from His Serene Highness, Prince Albert II. Thanks to all. Merci.